The first major domino of this offseason has fallen. Blake Snell has signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers. On the show today, we're going to talk about what this means for the rest of the free agent market and what this means for the New York Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, yesterday we were talking about Blake Snell on this show. Was he a fit for the New York Mets? Well, that dream is dead. Blake Snell has signed a 5-year, $182 million deal with the Los Angeles Dodgers. This deal includes $52 million and a signing bonus. It has some deferred money. We don't know how much yet, and no opt-outs. So if that deferred money is insignificant, he is going to come in somewhere around $35 million per year. If it didn't have any deferred money, this contract would have cost the Dodgers $36.2 million per season when it comes to the luxury tax. But when you hear a $52 million signing bonus and deferred money, you just have to wonder if the Dodgers once again were able to manipulate things a little bit and get that average annual value down. I know I projected at Just Baseball that Blake Snell would sign a 5-year, $155 million deal, which was $31 million per. He comes in, pretty good amount above that here with this contract. And what he has done here is he now goes to this team that is perceived to be the super team, the juggernaut, the team that everybody wants to see lose. And now he is part of the big bad Dodgers. And if everything broke right for the Dodgers next year, and that's a huge if, because you have guys with some real question marks, like Shohei Ohtani coming off Tommy John, Blake Snell, who's only hit 180 innings twice in his career, Tyler Glasnow, who's really never put together a completely healthy season, and Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who's in year 2 in the big leagues and had a year where he was a little bit up and down, particularly because he got hurt. With that said, with the caveat of the if, ands, and buts, if they get those guys to the playoffs healthy and they're rolling Shohei Ohtani, Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, and Yoshinobu Yamamoto as their playoff rotation, and it's the Dodgers who always find a way to a good bullpen, that team's unbelievable. This is a dynasty. This is a problem. And the crazy thing is, yes, there's a world where those guys aren't healthy. It's probably a realistic world where at least one of those guys is not available. But what they've done here by getting Blake Snell is they now add another ace to their deck. And if you lose one, you still got 3. If you lose 2, you still got 2. And you have so much depth. They have Tony Gonsolin and Dustin May, who should be coming their way back from Tommy John. Bobby Miller, Emmett Sheehan, Justin Robleski, Nick Frasso, Gavin Stone, River Ryan, Kyle Hurt. Ben Casparias was a starting pitcher, pitched fairly well coming out of the bullpen for them. He is an option. And they're going to re-sign Clayton Kershaw because they always re-sign Clayton Kershaw. Kershaw has said that he won't pitch for another team. So he's either retiring or coming back, and he said he's going to come back. He got shoulder surgery. He doesn't want to just waste that on a year where he had a foot and a knee injury. He's going to work his way back. Who knows how much they'll get out of him, and they'll probably go to a 6-man rotation throughout the season to keep their guys fresh. By the time they get to the end of it, who knows if Kershaw is part of a playoff rotation. But it really doesn't matter. They have an absolute embarrassment of riches when it comes to their pitching depth, and their frontline talent is absurd. And all of this goes back to last year. Major League Baseball let Shohei Ohtani sign that contract with the Dodgers. $700 million with $680 million deferred. You shouldn't be able to get around the luxury tax that way. You shouldn't. But why did they let that happen? Well, it's the most marketable player in the game going to one of their biggest market teams. And there's no world where Major League Baseball was upset with that contract because ultimately that contract was signed by the Dodgers. And you can be mad about it. You can be pissed off today as you wake up and drive to work and you think about that rotation they have and think about how unfair it is. But they worked within the constraints that everyone had. They landed Shohei Ohtani, who is printing money for them and doing it while all of his contract is deferred. And they're, I'm sure, stashing money in some Shohei Ohtani bank account where it's gaining interest and they'll be able to have that deferred money in the bank ready to go to give to Ohtani and dull it out once his tenure with them is over. And they have this 10-year window, and they're now in year 2 of the 10-year window, and they've already won 1 championship where they're going to try to put together one of the most dominant decades of baseball in Major League history, and they're well on their way. And you could say it's bad for the game. Like I said, you can be mad about it. But the reality is that outrage that fans have, that's good for the game because it brings interest. It brings eyeballs. How many people were watching the Dodgers hoping they would lose throughout this playoff run? That's the reality. Having a big, bad super team is good in sports. I grew up and I missed it a little bit because, the championships with Jeter, for the most part, I was, an infant, but you hated the Yankees when I was a kid, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of generations that have hated the Yankees and what they were able to build. We've hated the Astros over recent memory, not just because of the cheating, although that was a big part of it, but because they're really good. You look at basketball, the Golden State Warriors were not bad for the game. The Miami Heat were not bad for the game with the big 3. Those super teams create engagement. They get people invested. But if you're one of the teams chasing the Dodgers, and the Mets are in the same league, they just had one NLCS matchup against them. Who knows how many it might take to get over the hump? That team being this good, it's a scary proposition also because they're not necessarily done. I don't think they're going to sign Juan Soto. I think there are players that have preferences on which coast they want to play on. And I think that Juan Soto has a preference to play on the East Coast, just like Blake Snell has a preference to play out West. And he just signs to stay out West and play in Los Angeles and get his money too. Good for Blake Snell, honestly. You got to give him the props on that. Had to bet on himself again, and it paid off handsomely. But when you're looking at the rest of this offseason, it doesn't mean the Dodgers are done. Loaded rotation, they're set. They got a lineup to address still. Are they going to re-sign Teoscar Hernandez? Are they actually going to pull off the move that would piss off everybody? If they sign Juan Soto, that would cross the line, I think, for a lot of people. Where at that point, it just would be like, come on, what are we doing? What are we doing? They should not be able to have that amount of capital, and they do because it's the Dodgers, it's LA, and it's the most marketable player in the sport, giving you a ton of international revenue, who is getting paid pennies on the dollar throughout the entire length of the contract when he's playing. And then you eventually got to make it up to him on the back end. But at that point, the dynasty will have been cemented. It'll already be over. It's absurd what Dodgers have. And now the question is, how can the Mets close that gap? There is a slight silver lining on this front, and that is Roki Sasaki and Walker Buehler. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Pitchers that could get freed up for the Mets, but they aren't Blake Snell level pitchers. But we're going to go through that in just a minute. How did the Mets close the gap? We'll talk about it first, though. A quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL. It's all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, if you live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page to place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up today with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We are within 100 subscribers from getting to 11,000. getting closer and closer to that goal. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's talk about how you combat what the Dodgers have. They roll into the NLCS next year against the Mets, and they got Ohtani, Snell, Glasnow, Yamamoto. What do the Mets have to have on the other side to be able to compete with that? You got Kodai Senga and David Peterson right now. Good luck. This puts even more pressure on the New York Mets to come up with one of Burns or Fried, or to trade for an ace like a Garrett Crochet. And all of those moves have their risks. For Burns and Fried, as we talked about on yesterday's show, there's the comp picks you have to give up and the fact that they might get 7-8 year deals, and you have to worry about the back end of those contracts. For Crochet, converted reliever, who had an unbelievable first season in a big league rotation, but also had a massive inning spike. What's he going to look like? Do you sign him to an extension? Do you just keep him cheap for 2 years? A lot of concerns there, and you have to give up a haul to get him. I don't think the Mets are going to create a rotation that can compete with the Dodgers' best. I just don't think they can. They have to get an ace. They have to. And they need to get, realistically, another frontline pitcher. It doesn't have to be a clear-cut ace, but I think this adds some more pressure to bring back Sean Manaea. I think in a lot of ways, this adds pressure for the New York Mets to bring back the best parts of their team that went to the NLCS and then be able to add on to it. And to me, that screams bringing back Sean Manaea and Pete Alonso and making sure you get Juan Soto and Corbin Burns. Now, to say all of that, that's a crazy offseason to pull off. But that's what the Dodgers have been able to do. They have created such separation that you have to think about that. Now, granted, the Mets aren't competing with the Dodgers. They're competing with the Phillies and the Braves. But those are two really good teams. So you got to make it through the marathon to get into the dance. And then when you get to the dance, you have to have a team that is at least close enough that you can outplay the Dodgers in a 7-game series or a 5-game series. And it's Major League Baseball. Anything can happen. You can beat the Dodgers even when they're at their best. If the Mets get to that point and they're rolling and their momentum is strong and they have enough pitching, they can be fine. But that is a big caveat. You need to have enough pitching. This past year, they had all the momentum on their side. They were rolling. They had a lineup that did enough in that NLCS to put themselves in a position to actually win it and go to the World Series. But they came up short with pitching. So that's really the focus now. But you also can't ignore the fact that the best place that you can improve is signing Juan Soto. So Juan Soto is the priority, but then pitching comes in. And again, if you just sign Soto and don't re-sign Alonso, your lineup didn't get that much better. And you know on the other side, while their pitching's unbelievable, the Dodgers have Ohtani, Betts, Freeman. Maybe they sign Adames. Maybe they bring back Teoscar Hernandez. They still have Max Muncy. They have Will Smith. They have so much depth across the board and an ability to go out and add more. So the Mets have to be uber aggressive. They already did, but I think a move like this early, you know, if the Dodgers sign Blake Snell after the winter meetings and it's mid-January and a lot of other stuff had already happened, I don't know if this would have gotten quite the reaction that I've seen early on social media, and it happened 11 o'clock at night. So I can't imagine what people waking up tomorrow or as you're listening to this today are feeling as they get this news. But I think it does sort of put all these teams that are competing against the Dodgers on notice. Like, you got to go for it. And that could be a good thing because as a Mets fan, we might see a better product on the field as a result of the Dodgers just being that far and away ahead of everybody else. You got to find a way to get closer. And at this moment, the Mets have a great president of baseball operations. I think they got a really good manager. They have a superstar that you can build around Francisco Lindor, and they have an owner that's willing to spend. They are in a good spot, but they got to win free agency this time. They do. There's good players in the market. You got to find a way to nab a couple of them on both fronts, the bats and particularly the arms. Now, I will say, as it relates to the arms in particular, this does open up, I think, some opportunities to potentially sign a Walker Buehler. I thought he was going to just end up back with the Dodgers. Now that they have Snell, when you look at the depth that they have, I do wonder if Buehler is going to get sort of phased out there, where ultimately he'll have a healthy enough market where it's not worth it for the Dodgers to maybe spend $14, $15 million in the upcoming season to bring back Walker Buehler when they already are tied to so many big contracts in that rotation, from Glasnow to Snell to Yamamoto, technically Ohtani when it comes to average annual value, but they're only paying him $2 million. So outside of the fees that they're going to get on the back end of it when it comes to the luxury tax penalties, it's still nothing, which is so frustrating. But I think Buehler might now sign with another team, and Walker Buehler is a good bounce back candidate. We saw what he was able to do in October when it mattered the most. That's a guy I'd sign because of that, honestly. This is, if you look at the past decade, you're not going to find many pitchers who've had a better track record in October than Walker Buehler. This is a guy that knows how to compete on the biggest stage because he's been thrown into the fire from early on in his career and gotten those opportunities, and he's thrived in all those opportunities. And to thrive this past year with less stuff, I think that really spoke to the type of pitcher that he is, the type of competitor that he is. So all of a sudden, to me, Walker Buehler as the second or third, actually, ideally the third arm you bring in, that gets me excited. And then Roki Sasaki. Okay, this is the top international free agent. He's going to sign later in the offseason, so the teams will have their full international bonus pool for 2025 to sign him. And that could mean potentially giving it all to Sasaki or most of it and sort of foregoing a international class in 2025. But if it means getting a pitcher who can slide into your rotation, if you get him healthy, because he did have a little bit of injury stuff this past year, if you are able to work with him and get him to put together a healthy season and come October, he's ready to go, well, that's another guy that you can put into your cupboard of options to combat a team that could have an absolutely disgusting rotation. The Mets end up with with Corbin Burns, Kodai Senga, Roki Sasaki, and Walker Buehler. That ain't bad. Throw a little Shohei in there too. All right, now you're really cooking with gas. But overall, I think this signing for the Dodgers was just a reminder about who you're chasing. The Mets didn't necessarily need that. Doesn't mean that all of a sudden, if they were going to give Juan Soto $660 million, they just today decided to make it $690. No, but I do think it adds a little bit of urgency to all of the top contenders in the National League. The Dodgers are a destination. They have the money to keep on adding to this juggernaut, and they're the dynasty that everyone's going to be chasing for the next 10 years. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Now, the other question I have as it relates to this signing, so what does this mean for the market? Because there is a couple of left-handed pitchers that just fell off the board. Yusei Kikuchi signed with the Angels, 3-year, $63 million deal. Snell signs with the Dodgers. What do those guys have in common? Not only are they both left-handed pitchers who just signed, they are Scott Boras clients who have signed well before the winter meeting. So is there a new strategy that Scott Boras is employing after having the wait out the market strategy blow up in his face last year? Is he going to be more aggressive? And how does that impact the Mets' pursuit of some of his top clients? Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Sean Manaea, Corbin Burns, all those guys are Boras clients. So what does all this mean for how the market will develop as we are still a couple weeks away from the winter meetings? I'll talk about it in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks from the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. That's subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Okay, so how does this impact Scott Boras' client list? Kikuchi and Snell, they're gone. So now you look at his starting pitchers in this market. He's got Corbin Burns, he's got Sean Manaea, he's got Frankie Montas, and he's got Max Scherzer. Those latter two are obviously guys that aren't going to be prioritized. They might be signed later in the offseason. But Corbin Burns and Sean Manaea are the big-ticket pitchers that he's still got in his holster. And I think it's interesting how he's played this. With Yusei Kikuchi, I predicted he was going to sign with, who was it? The Braves, actually. A 3-year, $60 million. He ends up getting 3-year, $63 million. So it's interesting that they signed that as quickly as they did. I think for Boras to get $21 million per for Kikuchi, that's about as good as you can do. Yes, it's with a bad team in the Angels. I don't think Boras cares about that. I don't think Kikuchi cares about that. He's getting paid. So under that context, for a guy that, let's be honest, might not care as much, and this isn't just, I'm not trying to begrudge an international player, but I do wonder how much Kikuchi's motivation was winning when he signs with the Angels compared to Blake Snell, who, yes, got paid, but I think Blake Snell probably was a little more focused on getting that money from a team that's not the Angels, right? He ends up with the Dodgers. But bottom line, bird in hand, Scott Boras took it. Scott Boras didn't say, "Oh, Kikuchi's getting an offer from the Angels for $63 million. Let's hold out and see if we can get a fourth year." No, he said, "You know what? That's fair market value. That's maybe even better than fair market value. Let's jump on it." Blake Snell, after holding out all year last year, I'm sure there was maybe a little bit of some pressure on Scott Boras from Snell to say, "Look, I don't want to wait around. You get me a good offer. Let's jump on it. I want my years. I want my money locked up." And he gets a $52 million signing bonus. That's pretty nice. Corbin Burns, I think the goal is going to be to set the record for the most money a pitcher has ever made. That'd be $326 million, which would just barely get over what Yoshinobu Yamamoto got last year. Was that a 10-year deal? Was it a 12-year deal? I can't even remember how many years that was. Was it 12? But he got 325, which eclipsed a Scott Boras client and Garrett Cole, who had $324 million on a 9-year deal. It was a 12-year deal for Yamamoto. Yamamoto, not a Boras client, so one of his records is gone. He's looking at Corbin Burns as a guy that can break that record, and he just got the price tag for Snell. Maybe he gets it for Burns. If he does, I'd probably stay away if you're the Mets. But regardless, I think Burns maybe is a little bit of a longer play. Sean Manaea, though, what does this tell me? If there's a team that's aggressive and puts forth a commensurate value that makes sense to Scott Boras, there's a team that puts that 4 years, $84 million on the table, and it's Kikuchi money, but you get an extra year out of it, I think they might just jump on it. And maybe the Mets can use that as an opportunity, and maybe they can jump out in front and sign Sean Manaea. But it is interesting to see a little bit of a difference in strategy, and it does make you kind of on edge a little bit. Maybe that plays into Scott Boras' hand. Like, if you are waiting out the Pete Alonso market, maybe you got to be a little bit concerned that the Pete Alonso market might materialize and get away from you in a hurry. If a team just saw Snell sign like this and they have Pete Alonso, in their crosshairs, maybe they say, you know what, let's just go for it. Let's go for it right now. Let's submit an aggressive offer. There's not anything holding teams back from submitting contract offers while there's usually a pace of the offseason, and that pace usually is a slow play until you get to the winter meetings, and then it ramps up like crazy, and then things sort of follow after that. Every offseason is different, and Scott Boras could just completely flip the script, and then who knows, maybe this new strategy gets Scott Boras what he wants for all of his clients. Last year, everyone was pronouncing Scott Boras is dead. His days as the top agent are numbered, and I remember talking about it in article form at Just Baseball, probably on podcast for Just Baseball, and here about how Scott Boras had this year to look forward to prove all the naysayers wrong, because he has so many clients in this class. He's already, I think, won on the first 2 contracts. I don't think anyone is looking at the Kikuchi or the Snell deal and saying, yeah, he should have gotten more. No one is saying that. We'll see what he does on Soto. We'll see how he does on Alonso. We'll see how he does on Bregman. We'll see how he does on Burns. We'll see how he does on Sean Manaea. But he is well on his way to a fantastic offseason where he's going to be able to once again puff his chest as the super agent that he is and still say he is the GOAT. And as much as a lot of people don't like Scott Boras, you can't argue with the track record. The guy has gotten his clients paid for a very long time. The Soto signing now is going to be very interesting to see how long they're going to wait on that market to develop, because they're already taking offers. There were some reports that the Red Sox have upped their offer, and it seems like the Red Sox are doing a great job of putting out there that they're doing stuff while not doing stuff. They were apparently in on Kikuchi. They were in on Snell. Being in on guys that don't sign with you, to me, is not a good look, publicly. But they're in on Soto, so we'll see. I'd hope that that's another guy they don't land. I hope he ends up with the Mets, but you just don't know. And you don't know how some of these other teams are going to keep this bidding process going. The more the price gets driven up, the longer they're going to wait on it. Who knows? Maybe the Mets have to just come out in front and hit them over the top with the offer they can't refuse and see if anyone's willing to match it. And that might be the way that this thing works out. But I do think that Boras maybe learned a little bit of a lesson this time, or at least last year. And at least that encourages me that a lot of the movement could potentially come early. I'm hoping we get one of those winter meetings that we never forget. Regardless of how it works out for the New York Mets. Although, of course, we want to see the Mets be a big player in it all, and I'm sure they will be. Seeing Bregman, Alonso, Burns, all of those guys go, not to mention Fried, Adames, all these different top free agents, to see a lot of big moves, to see some monster trades, that's what we all want this time of year. So while I'm sure a lot of you woke up today frustrated that Blake Snell is a Dodger, ultimately, you never know how these things work out. Blake Snell could turn into an absolute bust with the Dodgers, and it might not even matter because they have enough talent to get around that. But the point is, we can't overreact to a single signing, especially in the game of baseball. It's so much different than basketball. Basketball, if you have 4 superstars like the Dodgers have in their rotation, theoretically, you're going to win. But in baseball, 3 of those 4 pitchers can be on the shelf, and all of a sudden, again, the Dodgers could be going to the playoffs with 1 ace, couple depth arms, and leaning on their bullpen heavily. You don't know what's going to happen at the end of the marathon next year. But I think the intrigue for this offseason just ratcheted up a little bit. To see Blake Snell go to that team for that amount and to form that rotation, it's just a really polarizing thing for the sport, I would say. Some are going to say it's bad. I think ultimately the engagement is going to tell us that it's good for the sport. And now we see how other teams respond to it. I'm excited to see Steve Cohen get that pocketbook out and start making some big signings. And of course, I'll be here breaking down all of them along the way. I appreciate all of you for tuning into the show today. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, our league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.